Welcome back to another episode of Built and Backed. Joining me today is Kendall Crocker, a fractional COO and strategic advisor with a 15-year track record across venture capital, startups, and strategy consulting. Kendall works with early stage founders at seed to Series B to help them scale faster and punch above their weight in fundraising and execution. Outside of work, you can find her cycling, meditating, traveling, or up early with her toddler. Kendall, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ashley. Great to be here.
It is great to have you here. I am very excited to chat with you because, as we chatted about prior to this recording, you've kind of spanned it all in terms of the tech world with your various roles. And so I'm excited to have you share that with our listeners and talk about your journey. And so that's where I'd love to have you begin today is talk about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So, as you said in the intro, I recently launched a fractional COO business for early stage startups. And that comes after a pretty, what I think is a winding career, but I look back on it, I'm like, oh no, I guess this makes a lot of sense. So, I started my career in a pretty corporate environment doing strategy consulting with Deloitte, spent 9 years there with a break in between for business school. But when I look back on it, I mean, I was working with Fortune 50 clients. I was wearing skirt suits oftentimes and things that I just don't even own now, which is funny to look back on. And left consulting initially to go launch an innovation function for a Fortune 100. And from that experience, understood that I really just wanted to be somewhere that was already working from an innovation mindset, which really meant being in the startup world. I know that a lot of your listeners are thinking about getting into startups in their career and how does that happen and where should I start? I mean, I was in my early 30s when I made the jump to startups, which felt kind of scary. And at the same time, I kind of relished in the fact that I may not have really known what I was doing. And I just went in and jumped in with both feet without
Mhm.
overthinking it. After having spent the first part of my career meticulously mapping out, okay, I'm going to spend 3 years here doing this, 2 years here doing that. Here's the city I'm going to be living in, and thought that I could really plan out my life in 10 years stints. And
Mhm.
maybe you can to a certain extent, but at some point you kind of have to shake it up or the universe shakes it up for you. So my first step into the startup world was going in for what I thought was a coffee meeting with a founder. I ended up staying at their offices for about 3 hours, met multiple other team members, realized that I was actually having an interview, and I think later that day got an offer letter and I signed it a week later and then started with the company a week after that. And
Oh my
that
gosh.
was that was just so unexpected from prior interview experiences, that last months you have to come in multiple times, like work on things. And so it was really refreshing to see that things could just be different and that things
Mhm.
could operate a lot differently from what I was used to. And it was a good exposure into what it would be like working at a Series B.
Mhm.
I joined as chief of staff, which I think was a great entry point as someone who has a more generalist background. And then after about a year was promoted to be the first VP of operations for the company and did a little bit of everything, which I think often if you're in any role at an early stage company, you probably are doing a little bit of everything. And if that's something that excites you, then I think that's a path worth pursuing. I think for people who are getting into tech, quote, later in their career, but maybe in your 30s versus your 20s,
Mhm.
it can feel a little daunting because you might think that you have to take a lateral step in terms of what your title is,
Mhm.
or a step back in terms of compensation. And maybe those things are true, but in the startup world, things can also change so quickly, and you move without the confines of a larger company. So, one, if the title bothers you, then go make a new title for yourself. If the compensation bothers you, then, bust your behind and prove that you're worth more money and then go ask for it. You don't have to wait for an annual review period that falls in line with every other employee at the company because there's probably only like 40 other employees at the company.
Yeah.
And so I found that to be super refreshing. and to be able to really accelerate your career if that's what's exciting to you.
Definitely. And it also sounds like, too, with you getting into the tech world in your 30s, like you weren't jaded to it compared to people who were in their 20s and kind of in there now 10 years later. Like you said, you just jumped in with both feet and didn't really get too caught up in what was going to happen. You just went for it.
Yeah, and I think, there's different kinds of politics that happen at small companies as compared to large companies. You never
Hmm.
really escape that. But when you're at a startup, things change every 2 to 4 weeks. So if something is frustrating to you, or if something isn't going right, or maybe you had a disagreement with someone, sometimes you kind of just have to wait it out, and then everything changes in 2 weeks. And then it'll be a new problem, but at least you've moved past that other one. And
Yeah.
once I adopted that mindset, it actually did reduce my stress level a
Hmm.
lot, which
Yeah.
I found refreshing.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a great point too, is that like nothing is forever, especially like you said in startups where things are moving so quickly. It's like you can't hold on to something. You just got to let it go. So that is refreshing for someone who tends to care a lot about their career, knowing that if something isn't quite right now, it's not always going to feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I know that you had started at the startup, and then I'm curious to hear what led you into your path to becoming a VC and working at a VC firm.
Yeah, so I found that working at a startup, I was really focusing in on the industry in which we operated, which was
Hmm.
important. You need to know who your competitors, you want to beat them out, you want to be able to truly understand your customers so you can build new products and services for them. But I kind of realized that I wanted to be somewhere where I had the freedom or maybe was required to have a wider innovation lens, like a broader view and perspective on the entire market. I'm sure that was the kind of generalist in me, also coming from consulting, but I felt like there were potentially a lot of things that I was maybe missing out on. I also liked the idea of being able to support and coach a lot of
Hmm.
different new companies, which is an aspect of the job of VC. I had pursued VC as a career when I was in business school, and then always assumed I would need to work at, a host of startups before it was feasible to get into the industry. Or I'm sure had other kind of blocks around why I didn't think it was possible to get in earlier on. But as part of my role at the startup, I was helping lead fundraising. So it was a lot of investor meetings, getting to know a lot of different VC teams. At some point along the way, one of the teams I met called Score posted a role, and this role came up, and I thought, you know what, I really liked the team when I talked to them. I want to meet with them and understand what this is all about. And it turned out that it actually, I think, was appealing for a lot of different reasons. One, it was a really small team,
Hmm.
which if you're getting into VC later in your career, which really means if you're not coming in as an associate, I thought that it was really important for me to be able to get access to as many parts of the job as possible so that I could really learn everything about the industry and about what it meant to be, like what a career in the industry would look like. And so, in my view, being part of a smaller team was a great way to do that. And they had a global purview. And that was super interesting to me because I had started my career from a global perspective and then had moved to a company that was just US based. And the startup was primarily focused on the New York market. And so I really kind of wanted to open that back up again. And then in some respects too, I was like, well, this opportunity's here. It feels like it's a good fit. So let's just go do it. And so I joined the team about 2.5 years after starting in my role at the startup. And it was a huge learning curve, which I recently told someone else that the best job to prepare you for VC is a job in VC, which means like everyone's facing a learning curve. There's certain
Mm,
aspects where if you're coming maybe from banking, you're going to be prepared for the financial aspect of it. If you're coming from working at a startup, you'll be prepared for different aspects of it. But everyone will face some sort of learning curve.
mhm.
And I think that was a surprise, but also meant that I really did go hard in trying to teach myself and ask a lot of questions and just throw myself into new situations because I felt that if I could last for a year, then I would be in a good place. And I
Definitely.
did last for I did last for a year. I ended up staying with the team for a few more years after that.
hmm And the advice that you shared there, I mean, like you said, so true. I wrote that down, and it's the best job to prepare you for VC is a job in VC, which is true. It's like everyone is learning something, no one knows everything. And I'm so glad that you shared that because I feel like oftentimes people in tech, when they're pursuing a new role, they can get intimidated and then they just don't apply at all or they don't go for it because they're intimidated by what it might entail. And so I love that you reminded people that yes, you're not going to know everything, and that's okay because you'll learn along the way, and that's what's normal about it.
Yeah. And you know, I think VC is an interesting career path too, in that depending on the culture of the fund where you are, either everyone could be a competitor potentially on your
Mm,
team or everyone's in it together. And so I think that's also something to think about when you're getting into the industry. And that even the people who are maybe at the top of the fund may not have all the answers versus when you were working in another job where you're kind of always getting promoted up the ladder, it's reasonable to expect that, oh, if there's someone that's my boss or my boss's boss, they would have all of the answers and I can go to them and ask that. But that's not necessarily always the case, especially where in an industry where you're always trying to find the next new thing
yeah.
and whoever's building something at the frontier. So it's interesting to think about that everyone's constantly always in a learning process.
Yes, absolutely. And what advice would you have for someone who is getting into VC? I know you mentioned like just kind of going in and whatnot, and that you mentioned it was a big learning curve for you, but what helped you find success in your role?
I think a lot of it is learning about the industry because venture is an asset class. And I think that's something that not a lot of people think about when they want to get into it. And so understanding the different players within the asset class and who's looking to get like what from it, what did the LPs want? What did the GPs of the fund want? What do the other investors on the cap table want in rounds that you're co-investing with? What does a founder want from you? And so understanding all the different dynamics there, because at the end of the day, it's a way for people to make money. And so there's the emotional tie of making an investment, but there's also the more quantitative piece and decision around making an investment. I think, I struggled with how much do I want to feel like an expert in when it comes to an industry or a market or a vertical, et cetera. Because there's, I think, a desire to want to know everything about everything. And I
Mhm.
do think at a certain respect, you probably have to have like a shallow layer of knowledge across everything. But then trying to figure out for yourself, okay, do I want to become a deep expert in one or two things? And then just spending the time to learn as much as possible as you can about those, meeting all of the founders in the space. I think that's a great way to just soak up the information. And then finding peers, whether it's within your team or at other places, that you can just talk to about either deal flow or the dynamics of working in the industry and just building a community for yourself, I think is really important. I honestly probably didn't do that enough early on because I also started in 2021, which
Mhm.
was still sort of weird coming out of the pandemic. I was living in Palm Springs. And so not until we came back to New York did I feel like I could do in-person networking. But I think a lot of that has changed now. And so doing a lot of the in-person networking just with other people in the industry is also really helpful.
Definitely. And I think from, like you mentioned, building a community, like people would be surprised just how much other people are willing to help them. Like it's not always, like you said, sometimes it could be everyone on your team is a competitor, but it doesn't always have to be that way. And so that was a really good point that you mentioned there that just ask people and have that circle around you that you can turn to when you need advice or need support in any capacity.
Yeah, and then it starts to kind of tie into things around personal brand in that eventually as you keep kind of moving up and getting more senior within the industry, you want others to refer deals to you. You want founders to seek you out as a specific investor. You want to be invited to the exclusive dinners or the non-exclusive dinners and other events. And that requires you to put yourself out there a little bit more. And it's not saying that you need to be posting on LinkedIn all the time, but at least kind of like meeting other people, and other people need to know that you invest and that you exist in this world. Because deal flow, or at least like being able to even bounce investment ideas off of other investors, becomes really helpful.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you just brought up that point about building a personal brand because I was just chatting with a few other people in VC recently, and a few of them mentioned the same thing as well as the importance of building a personal brand and putting yourself out there. And so I'm curious to hear beyond what you shared about like posting on LinkedIn and building a community, what else has worked for you with being able to build your personal brand?
I mean, I would say honestly, that's a work in progress for me, and it's something that I'm thinking about now and building out my own business. A lot of it, so one is, I think, simply starting to just show up at events, at conferences. There's so many conferences that you go to as an investor and as a founder. And I think when I started in this role, I was definitely more of an introvert
Mhm.
and didn't probably really enjoy being at conferences, but it was almost exposure therapy with the number of things that I had to go to
Yeah.
that now I love. Like, you can put me in a room where I know no one, and I'll leave with like five great contacts and great conversations. And so I think for me, a lot of it has just been getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. um, it's been a lot of just putting myself out there and simply being in the room, because you also want to just be even like a face that people recognize. I was at an event earlier this week where I had two people say, "Oh, I saw you from across the room and I thought you looked familiar." And we had never actually met before, but we've been at the same events. And
Mhm.
so that allowed us to strike up a conversation and find multiple things that we had in common. We're setting up calls and further coffee meetings. And so I think a lot of it, depending on what your personality is, for me, I connect really well in one-on-one. And so I've
Yeah.
been leaning into ways to be able to do that.
Yes, absolutely. I love that, especially what you mentioned about networking and whatnot. I always try to remember is that the people that you meet while you're networking, you're not just limited to them. Now you're kind of like subtly opened up to their network because then they're going to start to be like, "Oh, I have the great amount of people to introduce you to based on what you've shared with me." And I think that opens up huge opportunities as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. And that's now how I'm thinking about building my business. But in the past, as an investor, it's also been helpful to say, okay, even if you have a founder that's maybe thinking of raising in another year, let's say you met one person at an event and then they happen to have someone else in their network that would be really great for your founder to talk to. Like, you now have that connection that you can go back to, even if it's been months. It's still there and
Totally.
it exists. And so I think that's always helpful.
Absolutely. And so once you were at the VC firm for a few years, of course, now you've transitioned into owning your own business. And so I would love to hear more about what inspired you to go off and do your own thing and what it actually is that you offer and what made you want to go for it yourself.
Yeah. So over the years, I've had a lot of people ask if I would ever want to start something on my own. No, I always felt that question was in the vein of building a company. And so it's always kind of stuck in my head. I was like, well, I don't have an idea right now. But over the last year at the fund, there were some transitions happening, and I had the opportunity to either really double down on that career path with that specific fund or go try something new. So I took a few months to think about what that might be. In the meantime, I did some consulting for a portfolio founder around his fundraise. I was doing some advising work for another founder I'd met and started to think about, okay, what would it look like if I wanted to do more of this? and kind of had to get out of my own way and thinking about, I always saw a job as your 9 to 5, never 9 to 5 in hours, but I always saw it as like, oh, I work for this company and these are the days that I work and this is what I do. And the idea of stepping outside of that structure just felt very foreign to me. But
Hmm.
as I started to do more of this and have other conversations, I had a few people say, you know, why don't you do this full time? Like, I have other people that you should be talking to. So I was testing the idea with investors and founders in my network, getting feedback on, hey, if I was offering something like this, would you pay for it? Or is
Hmm.
this something that people even need? And pulling in that feedback to really create a more cohesive positioning and go to market. And so now I've been honing that in to uh, really be able to offer for founders at seed to Series B, know, fundraising and execution support. So what that means
Hmm.
tangibly. Tactically, I'm working with the leadership teams about 12 months pre or post fundraising. If you're a year out, we're getting a view of the business to say, okay, are you hitting your metrics? Is the product on track? Do you have the team that you need? Like, what does the market expansion look like right now to make sure that you're going to be the best company that you can be when it comes time to fundraise? And I can do the diagnostics and actually get in there and lead the work. I think especially for earlier companies that don't have a full-time COO, may not have anyone who's technically in like an ops leadership position.
Hmm.
I can be that more independent, cross-functional leader to just wrangle the teams and get something done in a short amount of time. As you're getting closer to the fundraise, like maybe 6 months out, I can lean into helping with crafting the story, putting together the materials, creating the founder or the investor outreach strategy, and then also navigating a lot of the things that happen as you get into the actual fundraise itself. And your board will often be very helpful with that as well. But oftentimes, if you're super early, maybe you only have like one board member.
Hmm.
And so I can be that additional point of view. And then finally, once you have the money, how do you actually put it to work? Like, okay, what are the actual goals? What are the projects that fall underneath those? Let's start executing on some of those. And now that you also have probably a more serious board and new board members, how do you navigate that? How do you manage them?
Hmm.
Um, Board reporting is can be very time intensive, and I personally think, as someone who sat on boards, that it's helpful to get that right early on. And so I can help you do that.
Yeah,
But I think a lot that really go to market or that positioning for me has been shaped by input I've gotten from investors and founders to say, like, no, this actually is what would be helpful. And I'm still always refining and iterating on that because I think, take a big customer centric view. And I'm sure as the market changes too, there will be some changes in what I'm able to offer or what companies need help with. So I'm kind of excited to see what that looks like.
absolutely. And I think one of the many benefits of a startup working with someone like yourself is the fact that you've been on the other side. You've been on the VC side. And I think the insights, connections, and expertise that you have there is vastly beneficial to them because now you're kind of playing both sides in that aspect and they can totally benefit from having your expertise there as they go to raise.
That's what I hope. I've had a client say that I'm kind of like the fundraising Sherpa or spiritual guide. And so I think that there's like a coaching aspect to it along with the very like tactical things that you have to do.
Mhm.
Um, I think what's interesting is that a lot of times founders may not know that they need that help until they get later down the road. And so, what I'm doing and trying to figure out maybe through content or other things or conversations is helping get the word out that, hey, there's a tool that exists for this. And this is maybe just at least a conversation you should have if you're thinking about fundraising.
Mm.
Um, because as with most of us, like sometimes if you're starting something new, you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
And so, as a first time founder, that's often the case, especially if you're raising like your pre-seed or seed. So that's been interesting.
Absolutely. And by being able to work with someone like yourself who can really handle the operations and fundraising piece, that allows the founder and potentially other people on the leadership team to actually focus on building the product or whatever it is to that they're really looking to bring to light and bring to market. So it's just kind of taking that pressure and time and so much responsibility off their shoulders and letting the expert do the work.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something interesting in that, in my point of view, a COO at an early stage should be able to be a strategic thought partner to the CEO
Mhm.
and also able to do the operations like day-to-day work. And I hope that people think that I can do that for them, given my VC and my operating experience. And I think a lot of times too, there's a lot of more and more, it feels like there will be more solo founders. And so
Mm,
they may be lacking kind of the strategic thought partner in their other co-founders. And so being able to step in and provide that even on a fractional basis, I I hope that it can be beneficial and kind of set a lot more companies up for success.
absolutely. And that's a really interesting point you brought up about feeling like there would be more solo founders as we move forward. And I'm curious to hear like kind of what that might be happening or why people might not be going in with a co-founder as they launch a startup.
Yeah, I was just actually talking with another friend about this, and so I should have pulled the stats up on it. But I think a lot of that's happening because of because of AI tools that are allowing people
Yeah.
to found on their own and go longer without having to raise venture money.
Mhm.
And because you have a smaller team, you don't have to raise money as quickly, and it allows you to see how far you can push it,
Mhm.
which I think is great. And honestly, not everyone should be going for venture funding. Um, but I'm interested to see what that looks like in terms of the longevity of some of the businesses and to what extent, like maybe you really don't need co-founders to be super successful. I'm sure we'll see more and more instances of that. I also think that VCs will have to get more comfortable with that. And that's as a
Mhm.
blanket statement, it's not like all VCs have specific requirements for founding teams, but I do think a lot of investors are generally looking for at least two co-founders because that reduces some of the risk for them of the investment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think you're right about the AI point is that from what I've been reading online and other people I've been chatting with, like AI gives non-technical people a technical skill in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and it allows you to build faster and start therefore bringing in revenue faster, which
Hmm.
extends your runway, means you don't have to bring on investors as soon, which means you have less pressure to run a business in a certain way.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a point earlier that I also thought was really good to kind of go deeper on, which is that sometimes founders don't realize they need help with the operations and the fundraising piece until it's too late. And so I'm curious to hear what advice you would give around that for anyone who might find themselves in that situation where they're like, oh shoot, I should have brought in a fractional COO earlier. Like, what advice do you have for them for just kind of digging out of that hole?
You know, I think this is also the case even for seasoned founders who may have miscalculated their runway or think that a fundraise will take 3 months and it ends up taking 6 months and find themselves in a more precarious situation. I think one, if you have trusted people on your cap table or in your advisor network that you can go to and be honest with and ask them for support, I think that is step one. In asking them, okay, here's where I am. What should I be doing now? What should I be focusing on? And two, the importance of community. Ideally, you have some sort of founder community around you and being able to go to even just one other founder and be honest with them and say, hey, here's the position I'm in. What would you be doing? And start just trying to ask people for help and support. And and then maybe there's a point where you need to say, okay, I know that I need to extend my runway by X number of months. what changes do I need to make? I'm going to make those today so that
Mhm.
I have time to really kind of run the fundraise. I won't say properly, but run it in an effective and efficient way so that I can get some money in the door. And I think a lot of founders face tough decisions like that. Not everyone talks about it, but
Mm.
there's definitely been a lot of times where you're like, oh crap, I'm, I didn't expect to be in this situation, and here I am.
Yeah.
And, maybe you can look at it as like, I know that I'm going to face times like this a lot as a founder. And so this is just the first test. And so let's figure out how I handle it, and then we'll move forward.
Yeah.
And I know that there's a lot of narrative and truth to it being a hard fundraising market. And so I think maybe another thing I would say is don't place all of the blame on yourself. In your question around like as a first-time founder, what if they find themselves in this situation? Like, okay, so you're in this situation. It's not your fault because you didn't necessarily know what to ask and what to
Mhm.
prepare for. And so just start asking and preparing now.
Yeah, I love that. Don't place all the blame on yourself. I think that's really important, especially because one thing I've been kind of saying to myself lately as a mantra is failure is learning. So if something doesn't work out once, I mean, that's teaching you something about how you can do it better or learn from it the next time around. And so that's a really great piece of advice there is to not go be so hard on yourself if something doesn't work out perfectly the first way. You can use what you've learned to make it better the next time.
Yeah, and I think, I haven't been a founder, and so I can't speak from experience, but I've worked with a lot of founders, and founder mental health is something that you really need to pay attention to. And so
Mhm.
making sure that you can like be kind to yourself when you need to be, I think is really important. And hopefully, surrounding yourself with people, whether that's advisors, your leadership team, your investors, et cetera, who feel the same way, then that will be good for the long haul because founding and running a company is it's a long game.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up founder mental health because that is something I've seen coming up more often in topics and reading about it online more probably in the past year than I had previously, but I still feel like it's not talked about enough. And so I think it's really awesome that you made the point to mention it because it is something that should be prioritized. And so, from what you had shared in your bio, it sounds like that's something that you prioritize for yourself as well between what you do with cycling and meditating and spending time with your toddler. Being able to have those moments in a busy career is important. And so I'm curious to hear kind of how you make that time for yourself, how you balance, or maybe not necessarily balance because it might not always be 50-50, but how you make sure to have that time outside of work without feeling guilty about it and feeling like you're neglecting your career.
Yeah, I I probably have some tips. I will also say it's definitely something that I am still working through and will probably always work through because I've spent a lot of my career working very long hours, even when I probably didn't have to. But I did several years ago both get trained in Vedic meditation, which is similar to transcendental meditation. And then a year after that was certified to be a mindfulness instructor, which was another training. And I've not been as consistent with that maybe in the last year, but it's nice to know that I have that foundation to go back to and that I can tap into it. And I do think that that has been extremely helpful. And just making time for it. And even with that, so with TM and with Vedic meditation, you're supposed to do 20 minutes twice a day. And I think it's easy to brush that off and say, oh, I don't have 20 minutes to do that, or I can't do it twice a day. And so actually just doing it maybe for 10 minutes once a day
Mhm.
and just giving myself the grace to do that because I'm still doing it. And I think that's when it comes to working out in the same way. It doesn't always have to be an hour-long workout. If you can get in 15 minutes, or if you can just take the stairs versus taking the elevator, like it's finding, I don't know if that's habit stacking per se, but it's finding ways to like add on exercise to other things that you have to do. So I'll take a city bike sometimes instead of taking the subway to get somewhere. Um, but otherwise, I'm still always trying to like finish that book, along with
Yeah.
everyone else. I do have a hard time reading fiction when I feel like I have all of these podcasts and articles and nonfiction things that I want to read. Um, but I think it's just right now I'm focusing on finding small ways to give myself time.
I love that. It's like the idea of something is better than nothing. And I feel like whether it's founders or anyone in tech, sometimes we have that all or nothing mentality. And if we don't do the full 100%, we can feel guilty that we didn't reach that. But I love what you shared that just starting small and doing what you can is better than not doing it. And then once you have the capacity to build upon that, you'll be able to. But just taking those baby steps, I think, is what's so important.
Yeah, and it's like I know that there's a lot of stuff in the wellness world right now that is also a big part of founder culture, and I've definitely been deep within that world for a while. And I do feel like there's this sense that you have to do it perfectly, or you have to journal for 10 minutes a day every day. Otherwise, like you're not actually journaling. It's like, then, that's gonna keep everyone from starting to try it. So
Totally.
I think it's finding ways to just try it and not even feel like you have to make it a habit because
Mhm.
making it habit makes it feel like you're failing if you're not doing it all the time. So being
Yeah.
celebrating when you do it versus making yourself feel bad when you don't do it.
Oh, I like that. Like a perspective shift.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great piece of advice. And now, for anyone who's listening to this episode, what advice would you have for them as you've gone through your career and they're going through theirs? Like, what's something you've learned along the way that you wish you knew when you were starting at the very beginning?
Oh gosh. Um, I wish, I wish I had taken more risks earlier in my career in that, people always, I think it's easier in hindsight, but when you're younger, you really often, not all the time, often don't have the same sorts of responsibilities.
Hmm.
If you're renting versus paying a mortgage, if you're living alone versus with your partner, or if you don't have kids versus if you have a kid. And so figuring out, when can I take the risk? Let's just take the risk now versus putting it off and off and off.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's just something that's probably people always realize as they get older. I think that for me, and I'm learning this now, but have probably definitely gotten better at it versus when I was earlier in my career, is, there's a certain cringe factor to putting yourself out there, and that could mean posting on LinkedIn. That could mean wanting to be the one who's presenting in a town hall. That could be, being the person who's more visible at an event. And you kind of just have to get over it. And that not everyone's thinking about you. And I know that feels like tired advice because I feel like everyone says that all over TikTok. Like, not everyone's thinking about you, so don't worry about it. But I do think that's true.
Yeah.
And if they are, there's nothing you can do to probably change their mind at this point anyway. So just, they're going to think
Yeah.
it.
That is a great piece of advice because think about like how many times people have prevented themselves from doing something because they were scared about what others would think about them, just for those other people to not even think about them in the first place. Like imagine the opportunities people have missed out on because they just didn't go ahead and do it anyway and stopped caring what others might think.
So here's maybe an example of that because I also think some people are nervous to make career changes because they're overthinking what others' perceptions may be of that
Hmm.
decision. I am the eldest daughter, and I think that I am always probably still worried about what my parents think of me. I want them to approve. And I had this assumption that they really approved of my job in consulting because it was a well-known brand. I had a 401k. It was a good paycheck. And I was nervous even in my early 30s to tell them, like, oh, I'm taking this startup at this like somewhat niche company in industry. And, there's really no job security whatsoever. And they were like, yeah, well, we really didn't know what you were doing in consulting, but you seemed to like it. So we just wanted to be supportive and we think it's great that you're doing this. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? Like, I thought you guys loved that I was in consulting and working for this big company and
Hmm.
blah, 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 blah. And they were like, no, we thought you liked it. So we were being supportive. So it's like, if you're trying to make decisions based off of someone else, it's really hard to read their mind.
Yeah, it is.
So just
Yeah.
do what feels right for you.
Hmm.
And you also don't have, it can be just what's right now.
Hmm. I love that. It doesn't have to be what's right in the long term. It can just be what's right in the present moment. That is a really good piece of advice.
Yeah, because you can always, I mean, there's circumstances around everything, but like you can make decisions to change. And I like to think that every possible path you would ever want to take exists out in the universe, right? Like there's infinite
Hmm.
parallel universes that exist. And the way that it becomes real is by simply you walking down the path. And
Hmm.
then you're living on that certain universe.
Yeah.
And any other decision you would have made just broke off into another universe. And so you don't have to worry about making the wrong decision because there's always going to be a version of you doing whatever decision you made.
Yep.
So why not just take a chance on something?
Yeah. I love that. Kendall, you've had so many really awesome experiences throughout your career and all these different roles. And so I imagine you've met some really cool people within the space. And so one thing I'm curious to hear is if you could give a shout out or give some kudos to anyone who's doing something really cool in tech right now.
Yeah. I mean, I know I mentioned community and I'm really starting to dig in on the importance of that. I think especially not only just for women, but I'm involved in several more female-focused communities. So there's a WhatsApp group and platform called Unlock VC, which was started by Sophie Winwood over in London. And it primarily focused first for women in VC in Europe. And because in my last role, about 50% of our portfolio was in Europe. So I got involved in that. And it has just been such a supportive community, whether
Mhm.
it's, you know, giving giving an extra boost to someone's LinkedIn announcement or asking for support diligencing another company or giving away free tickets to a conference that they're going to. Like, it's just been really nice to be a part of that. And then stateside, there's a few women that I angel invest with that are building really cool things. There's The Helm, which is a fund that just invests in female founders. And then they also have an angel syndicate that you can be involved in. And I feel like I've met really cool companies through that. And then Dream Ventures and Golden Hour Ventures run together an accelerator for female founders who are raising their first round. And they put on awesome events in New York and LA. And it's been really cool to be a part of that community and not only see and meet interesting founders, but also just the other people who attend the lunches and breakfasts.
Mhm.
I feel like I've met some really, really interesting people, and I always get energized from attending those.
Yes, I love that. Kendall, this has been an amazing episode. I mean, I feel like I was literally writing down every single thing you were saying because I'm like, it's just so good. I really appreciate you sharing with our listeners everything you've done throughout your career. And now I would love to give you the opportunity to share with them where they can find you online in case they'd like to reach out and connect further.
Sure. You can find me at kendallcrocker.com. You can email me at hello@kendallcrocker.com. And excited to just have a chat with anyone who wants to learn more.
Amazing. And I will include those links in the show notes that our listeners can easily click through and connect with you from there. Thank you so much again for coming on this week's podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley.